And this hikmah centers on how we understand the qada and qadar, or the divine preordainment and decree of Allah Ta'ala. And in this hikmah, Imam Ibn Ata'illah says, ما ترك من الجهل شيء من أراد أن يحدث في الوقت غير ما أظهره الله فيه. ما ترك من الجهل شيئا من أراد أن يحدث في الوقت غير ما أظهره الله فيه. He who wishes that at a given moment of time there should appear other than what Allah has manifested in it has not left ignorance behind at all. Let's read that again. He who wishes that at any given moment of time something should manifest other than what Allah has decreed in that moment, this person has not left ignorance behind whatsoever. So this hikmah is talking about how we understand the qada and qadar. The qada and the qadar referring to the preordainment and the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the importance of having rida or satisfaction with the divine decree. So we want to unpack this a little bit by explaining what he means by waqt, time, and what is he actually getting at. How does one show satisfaction with the qada and qadar? And we want to explain what this hikmah means, and then we want to explain what it doesn't mean, because there are certain misconceptions people have about the qadar. Now, he uses the word waqt, which we translate here as time, as that's what waqt means. But the word waqt in the hikam is a technical term. It is a technical term used in this science, so it has a very particular meaning besides the generic meaning of time. In the nomenclature of this science, the waqt is the moment. So this defines or denotes any particular state that the servant finds himself in at any given moment. So if the person is experiencing inner contraction or constriction, qabd, that's the waqt of qabd. If it is expansion, that's what they're experiencing, right? So the waqt is basically whatever Allah has placed you in that very moment. That can apply to internal states, that can apply to sharia matters. So when the iqamah of Isha comes in 20 minutes, that will be the waqt of salat, right? So waqt is time, but in this technical sense it means the particular place where Allah has placed you in that moment and what is required within it of adab, of etiquettes and manners. So let's explain what this hikmah means and then explain what it doesn't mean. Our starting point is aqeedah. And we say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator of everything. He is the creator of every moment. He is the creator of every movement, of every stillness, every change. Allah is the creator of every fluctuation in the cosmos. Every single movement, every single change is under the qayyumiyah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every single thing within the cosmos is recreated, fashioned, shaped, and sustained at every single moment by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And every change, every event, everything that is happening at every single moment is known by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before it happens, before those changes take place. Nothing occurs in the cosmos that is outside of the knowledge and power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nothing happens that we can't use the word surprise. Nothing happens as a surprise because the knowledge of Allah ta'ala has no beginning and has no end, because anything that happens that's an update means prior to it there was jahl, and ignorance cannot be, it's the opposite of ilm. So that's our basic belief. Nothing escapes the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and everything that occurs in the cosmos is the specific will of Allah ta'ala expressed in the creation. That's our basic belief. When the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was asked by the angel Jibreel about Iman, he explained the 6 pillars of Iman, and the last one of those, he says, وَأَن تُؤْمِنَ بِالْقَدْرِ خَيْرِهِ وَشَرِّهِ, that you believe in the divine decree, the good and the evil thereof. And in another narration, he says, أَن تُؤْمِنَ بِالْقَدْرِ حُلْوِهِ وَمُرِّهِ, that you believe in the qadr, the bitter and the sweet thereof. So this is a foundational belief that we have as Muslims. Nothing is happening in the cosmos except what Allah Ta'ala knows and wills. There's none that overpowers Allah's will or that does something outside of Allah's knowledge or will. That is our basic belief. So with that foundational belief in our hearts as Muslims, we turn to the world and observe what's going on in the world, and we turn inwards and see what's going on inside of our hearts, and we observe and we acknowledge that all of these things, both inside of us and outside of us in the cosmos, everything is the object of Allah's qada wa qadr, His preordainment and His divine decree. Every single being is the object of Allah's power and will. That's the reality. Every movement, every stillness. And when you understand this, not just intellectually, but in your heart of hearts, you are experiencing Tawheed. You're not just affirming it with your mind, you are living it with your heart. So Imam Ibn Ata'illah is talking about a lot of foundational matters of our belief, but beyond the intellectual domain, he's talking about it from the perspective of the heart. How do you actually live these realities? So, because it's easy to affirm these things intellectually, but to affirm them in day-to-day life in our hearts is a completely different matter. That's what Ibn Ata'illah is concerned with. He's telling us that every single moment, every single waqt has a certain adab that is due. Every moment that you find yourself in. If you are in a moment of jalal, of experiencing the divine rigor, that could be a hardship, that could be something that's difficult for you. That's an experience of the jalal of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In that waqt, that time, there's a particular adab due upon you, which is patience. If you are experiencing the jamal of Allah Ta'ala, the divine beauty in a given moment, the adab is shukr, gratitude. If it is the time for salat, this is the time of ta'ah, obedience. And if you are in a time when you committed a sin, the adab due in that moment is to seek forgiveness and make tawbah. So every single moment you're in has a certain adab required of you. So he's saying to us, going back to this hikmah, that he who wishes that at any waqt, any time, there appear other than what Allah has manifested in it, has not left ignorance behind at all. He's saying that you have not left behind ignorance. This is of the greatest types of ignorance because it's ignorance of Allah. You have not left behind ignorance at all if you wish for there to appear in any given moment something other than what Allah Ta'ala has decreed in that moment. This is objecting to the divine decree. This is lacking rida. So anyone who is objecting to what Allah Ta'ala has decreed is demonstrating their absolute ignorance, because in that there's an underlying assumption. Think about it. If a person wishes there to appear other than what Allah has manifested, the underlying assumption there, the unspoken assumption is that if it were up to me, I would do something better. If it were up to me, there would be a better thing happening than what Allah has decreed. And that's a very dangerous proposition. It's a very dangerous assumption to take. It's unspoken, right? But it's there if the person is displeased with the qada and the qadar. So a person has to acknowledge that even in difficult things, even in pain, even in war, even things that in Sharia we have to condemn, there is still a divine wisdom in why these things occur. And we don't often see them until far later on. The point is, one should never assume that if it were up to them, they would run the universe better than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a very dangerous assumption. And no one says that, but this is what Ibn Ata'illah is reminding us. If you wish for anything to appear other than what Allah has decreed, then you have not left behind ignorance whatsoever. That is the basic meaning of this hikmah. And for this hikmah and a few others, we have to explain what it means, and we also have to explain what it doesn't mean. Because it's very easy to have certain misconceptions arising from this hikmah. A person can misunderstand it and think it means other than what it's really saying. So let's talk about what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that you should be satisfied with sin. It doesn't mean you should be satisfied with laziness. It doesn't mean you should be satisfied with things that are displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if a person says they're pleased with these things because Allah decreed them, this is actually a makr. This is a subtle plotting of Allah ta'ala. It's a trap, because it leads them to being pleased with what Allah has stated in the Quran He is displeased with. This is a trap, and it's a trick from shaitan, and this is what the ulama call al-ihtijaju bil-qadar. Using the qadar as an excuse to do whatever a person wants to do. So, deep down, if a person says, let's say they're engaged in gambling, and they say, well, Allah decrees for me to gamble, and we should be pleased with the qadar, therefore, I should be pleased with my gambling, and you should be pleased with it too. Now, deep down, that is just a trick of shaitan and a delusion. They don't really believe that, but they're using it to justify their sin. And the reason why we say they don't really believe that is because they don't apply it to everything else. They only apply it to these sins. They don't say, I don't have any food in my refrigerator, and I don't have enough money to pay my rent. That is the qadr of Allah, and I have to be pleased with it. I will starve. No, they will not be pleased with that. They will get up and look for food some way, somehow. They will find a way to scrounge up money to pay their rent. They will make efforts, and they will not say, I'm pleased with the qadr, therefore I starve. They only use that for sins. They don't use it for survival. Likewise, they're inconsistent. If a person says, I am pleased with this sin because Allah has decreed it for me, as if they're forced, and I have to be pleased with the qadr, they're not really applying that universally. Because if a person goes up to them and smacks them in the head, they're going to get angry. They get smacked. Why did you do that? The person who smacks them only needs to say, Allah decreed that I smack you in the head. You have to be pleased with the qadr of Allah in your head getting smacked. How can you object to the qadr of Allah in getting smacked? In fact, let me smack you a second time to teach you. They'll get angry with that, but they won't get angry with themselves for violating the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or doing what is haram. So it's a false objection, and they're not pleased with it universally for hunger and thirst. They take the means to get food and drink, and they're not happy if other people behave that way. It's just a shaitani trap. So being pleased with the qada and the qadr doesn't mean being pleased with sin, as we will explain. Likewise, being pleased with the qada and the qadr of Allah does not mean we forsake commanding the good and forbidding the evil, calling out evil as evil and encouraging good. It doesn't mean that we don't make da'wah, that we invite people to Allah Ta'ala, because Allah Ta'ala commands those things, and He orders people with conditions to engage in da'wah. So how can Allah Ta'ala command us to do something and then order us to be pleased and not do anything about its opposite? It's an absolute contradiction to say that you have to be pleased with idol worship and you also have to call people against idol worship. Those two things do not combine. So being pleased with the qada and the qadar does not mean being pleased with things that Allah Ta'ala has forbidden. It does not mean being pleased with kufr. Allah Ta'ala mentions in the Quran that la yarda, He is not pleased with kufr for His servants. So that is not a contradiction. Likewise, you can be pleased with the decree of Allah Ta'ala and still acknowledge pain. It doesn't mean that if you are pleased with the qada and the qadar that you don't feel pain. If you go to the doctor and you have to get a shot or you have to get an operation, salamakumullah, it doesn't mean that you're not supposed to feel pain. It's completely natural that you feel pain. But one of the early Imams, Abu Ali al-Daqqaq, rahimahullah, he mentions that ar-rida, or satisfaction with the divine decree, is not that you don't sense pain. He says satisfaction with the divine decree is that you do not show opposition to the judgment of Allah Ta'ala. So you say, I have to go to the doctor and I have to get this operation. This is the qadr of Allah. Allah does not make mistakes. There's a wisdom in this that I may not know, but it hurts and I'm in pain and I ask Allah for patience in dealing with the pain. You can have both of these. One does not contradict the other. You have pain, you can acknowledge that, but you're not displeased with the qada and the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, there's the saying of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. There's a very famous saying recorded in the books where he says, never have I ever been afflicted with a test except that Allah Ta'ala has placed 4 blessings in it. Number 1, it did not afflict me in my religion. It did not cause me to swerve in my deen. Number 2, I was not denied experiencing satisfaction with the divine decree. Number 3, it was not greater than it could have been. And number 4, I hope in reward on account of this difficulty. So you can experience pain while also being satisfied with the divine decree. Now, the key to understanding this is to understand the difference between what Allah has decreed, or His decree as such, as the divine action, and the object of the decree. Now, in Arabic, we call this the qada and the maqdi. So the qada is the divine action. What has Allah decreed in this moment? That you get sick, that you get a promotion at your job, that this or that happens, that you get married. The qada of Allah, Allah has willed that these things occur for you in these specific moments, in these awqat. That's the qada. The maqdi is the actual fruit of that, which could be some pain, could be some difficulty involved. You don't have to be pleased with the pain, but you're pleased with the act of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're not pleased with the kufr of the kafir or the shirk of the mushrik, but you are pleased with the divine decree that this has taken place so that Allah distinguishes the truthful from the liars, the pure from the impure, so that there is the commanding of good and forbidding of evil, there is da'wah. All of these things take place. These are for divine wisdoms that you have different types of people. That doesn't mean you're pleased with the kufr of Abu Jahl. It just means that you are pleased with the decree of Allah, how it has unfolded in the history of Islam. And it just so happens that Abu Jahl died upon kufr. So you're not pleased with the kufr, you're not pleased with the sin, you're not pleased with evil, but you are pleased with the divine act of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the qada is the act of God, and the maqdi could be good or evil relative to our experience. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this in a few places in the Quran, that perhaps you dislike something, وَيَجْعَلُ اللَّهُ فِيهِ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا, and perhaps Allah puts a lot of good in it. So Ibn Ata'illah is simply taking a basic point of Muslim belief and trying to get it from our heads intellectually into our hearts, telling us that should you wish for anything to appear at a given waqt time other than what Allah has decreed in that moment, then you have not left behind any ignorance. Now, if it concerns matters of Sharia, there are commands attached to these things, either to do something or to abstain from something. And if it is something bad relative to our experience, we are satisfied with the decree of Allah. We do not express dissatisfaction with the divine decree, even if we feel pain, even if we suffer. And we are ordered to exercise patience and seek the help of Allah Ta'ala in that difficult situation. If Allah decrees good for us and decrees blessings for us, we are pleased with the qada of Allah, and we happen to be pleased with the maqdi as well, and we express shukr for that. So every moment there's a specific adab that you have to uphold. The key is never to be displeased with the qada and the qadar, because we don't have the full picture of how things unfold. We can see something bad happening in this exact moment. We think it's bad, it's not fun, it's painful, but we don't know the long-term consequence, what things may unfold in the future as a result of that seemingly bad thing. How many bad things happen to you that turn out to be good 10 years down the road, but you don't see it until you are 10 years ahead in your life looking back on that experience. So being pleased with the qada is being satisfied with the acts of God, saying Allah does not make mistakes, and that there's nothing I could do that will make things better than what Allah has decreed in this moment. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.